Since 2020, our Asian region has seen some dramatic changes and dramatic events unfold. We've got all those details, and good morning and welcome to the Breakfast Rundown with me, Zulf. Now, since 2020, as I mentioned, we've seen a lot of changes taking place, and there were some key moments that took place in our region, that's the Asian region. Now, on the 1st of February 2021, in Myanmar, the military launched a coup and took over the government. Now, one of the most iconic images of that coup was when a female instructor, a female fitness instructor, was doing her regular live broadcast from opposite the Myanmar government building, and in the background they witnessed the movement of military vehicles proceeding towards that government building. And thereafter, the same year, something that no one expected, as US and NATO troops withdrew from Afghanistan, Taliban came over and without firing a single bullet took over Kabul and established what they called a new era for Afghanistan. And then in 2022, in Sri Lanka, following the economic crisis and Sri Lanka defaulting on servicing its external debt, and after mass protests by the people, former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was forced to resign and he fled the country, leading to a new change in government. And then finally, yesterday, that's the 5th of August 2024, ending a 15-year rule by one of the most prominent figures in Bangladesh politics. Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister, the 5-time Prime Minister, was forced to resign and she fled the country to India, and now the Bangladeshi army has announced that they would form a new interim government. Well, those were the key developments in the Asian region over the past 5 years. Now, Bangladesh's President Mohammad Sahabuddin has decided that yes, he will be forming a new interim government after the resignation of Sheikh Hasina, the country's longest serving Prime Minister. Now, her resignation comes in the wake of almost 400 deaths since early July this year. Now, the decision to form a new government was decided at the Bangladesh Presidential Palace, along with the heads of the Army, Navy, Air Force, police and other political figures, including student movements and civil activists. Now, according to reports from Bangladesh, the Bangladesh Army has now been vested with the task of ending vandalism, looting and other forms of violence across Bangladesh. Now, the president has also approved the release of all the student activists who were arrested during the recent violence that broke out in Bangladesh, stemming from the protest over the government's quota system on government jobs. Now, the Supreme Court of Bangladesh had delivered a ruling, but despite that ruling, the violence continued, leading to mass protests as well, and then eventually the resignation of then Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. Now, interestingly, police firings, mob activity and arson across Bangladesh led to the deaths of 135 people yesterday alone. On Sunday, 96 people were killed in acts of violence across Bangladesh. Now, in a new development, Sheikh Hasina's son, that's Sajib Wazid Joy, has announced that his mother will not be making a comeback to politics, and she has no intention of doing so following her resignation. Now, he says that it was very disappointing that the people of Bangladesh resorted to acts of violence to drive away the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina from the official residence. Now, these protests initially started from the 16th of July this year over the government's quota allocation for government jobs, and that led to clashes between the security forces, pro-government activists and students, and eventually these protests turned violent, and then deadly clashes broke out all across Bangladesh. Despite that Supreme Court ruling on the government quota allocation for government jobs, the protests are still continuing. Even last night, there were deadly clashes across several areas in Bangladesh. Now let's shift gears to Sri Lanka. On this 21st of September, Sri Lankans will head to vote in one of the most decisive presidential elections in recent history. Interestingly, the number of candidates running for the office of president is high. So far, a total of 17 individuals have placed their cash deposits with the Election Commission to run for the highest office in the country. Now, at the same time, the Election Commission has also extended the deadline to accept postal voting applications. Now, initially, the deadline was last night, midnight. However, due to the low number of applications received this time around for postal voting, the Election Commission has decided to extend the deadline to the 9th of August. That's later this week. Now, according to Election Commissioner General Saman Sriratnayaka, applications for postal voting can be submitted to the respective district election offices. Now, at the same time, yesterday, the Election Commission issued a very interesting notice. They refuted claims that any notice that had been going around on social media claiming that registered voters can go and vote or exercise their franchise at any polling station at the upcoming presidential election is false. The Election Commission emphasized that if you are a registered voter, once you get your official ballot notice, it mentions the official registered ballot center for the respective registered voter. That is the area, or that is the station that you can go and exercise your franchise. Now, in addition, for postal voting, the respective designated postal voting office or officer is assigned by the Election Commission, and in the presence of such officers, postal voting can be exercised. Now, at the same time, the ministry's secretaries have been summoned to the country's Election Commission today. Now, over the course of the past few weeks, we've seen a lot of meetings taking place at the Election Commission, and this time around, the secretaries of all the cabinet ministries as well as the chief secretaries of provinces have been summoned to the Election Commission. That is for preparations that need to be made for the 2024 presidential election on the 21st of September, and also to discuss the misuse of state property during the run-up to the election. Now, Election Commissioner General, Election Commission Chairman RMAL Ratnayaka said that a number of complaints have been received by the Election Commission over the abuse and misuse of public property ahead of the presidential election. Now, in addition, additional secretaries that are overseeing public assets and the relevant officials have also been summoned for this meeting. The discussions will take place in length over the abuse of state property. At the same time, the chairpersons of state corporations will also be present for these meetings. Now, moving on, Sri Lanka's Parliament will meet this week. From today to the 9th of August, the Parliament will meet. Now, interestingly, a private member's bill will be presented to the Parliament today. It is expected to be presented today. Now, what is this private member's bill? Now, this bill is with regard to the provincial council elections. Now, over the recent days, we've heard that President's Council and Parliamentary M.S. Manduan saying that he will also be moving a bill to Parliament on the provincial council elections. Now, a private member's bill is expected to be presented to Parliament this morning once it convenes. Now, at the same time, an adjournment debate on the failure of the levee barrier along the Nilwala River is expected to be taken up in Parliament today. Now, at the same time, parliamentary watchdogs, the Committee on Public Finance and the Committee on Public Enterprises is also expected to convene in Parliament later in the day. Now, Sri Lanka's Department of Immigration and Immigration has said that they are yet to receive the Supreme Court ruling on the suspension of the controversial e-visa system. Now, you might recall over the past few months, the e-visa system led to much controversy in Sri Lanka, and there were complaints and petitions filed with the country's Supreme Court as well, alleging the abuse, alleging corruption in this process. Now, thereafter, Sri Lanka's Supreme Court suspended the implementation of this e-visa system until the relevant petitions that were filed with the Supreme Court are heard and completed. And at the same time, the Supreme Court also ordered the restoration of the previous system in the country. Now, these petitions were filed by several MPs, including Patali Shampuranavaka, Rauf Hakim, and Mb Sumandiran. Now, they contended in these petitions that the introduction of this new e-visa process or system posed a significant threat to the country's national security. Now, after submissions, the Supreme Court decided to issue an order temporarily halting the implementation of the e-visa process and returning back to the existing process. Now, according to the Controller General of Immigration and Immigration, Harsha Ilukpitia, the option now available for tourists visiting Sri Lanka is the on-arrival visa system at the Bandaranaike International Airport. Now, why is this? It's because the Immigration Department is yet to receive the Supreme Court ruling on the controversial e-visa system. Now, at the same time, something interesting developed in the past few days in the Indian Ocean close to Seychelles. Now, approximately 300 nautical miles away from Seychelles, two Sri Lankan fishing boats sent out distress calls after a mishap in the high seas. Now, interestingly, there were 9 Sri Lankan fishermen on board, and they had left the Dikovita Fisheries Harbour just a few weeks ago. Now, according to confirmed sources, these 2 fishing boats had been procured by a Dubai-based businessman for the sole purpose of engaging in fishing activities off the coast of Somalia. So these 2 boats had left Dikovita Fisheries Harbour several weeks ago and were proceeding towards Somalia for fishing activities following the purchase of these 2 boats by the Dubai-based businessman. Now, the Seychelles Coast Guard, after receiving the distress call from these 2 boats, had immediately dispatched several of its vessels, and yesterday we were informed that a vessel reached the location of these fishermen, provided them with food, water and fuel, and right now the Seychelles Coast Guard is towing these boats to shore for processing and other investigations, and also to provide support for the fishermen who were stranded on the high seas almost 300 nautical miles away from Seychelles. Well, let's move on to some interesting sports news now. Sri Lanka's sprint sensation Tarushi Karunaratne. Well, we all know that she made a remarkable achievement as well in the local scene, and also proceeded to compete in the Olympics as well. Now, one of her performance kits signed by her has been handed over to the International Olympic Committee's museum, where it will be put on display. Now, this performance kit signed by Tarushi Karunaratne was handed over to one of the senior officials at the International Olympic Committee's museum, and after the presentation was made, it was decided that this will be put on display at the International Olympic Committee's museum. Now, moving on, Sri Lanka's Aruna Darshana, who became the first Sri Lankan to qualify into the 400 meters semi-finals at any Olympic event, will compete in the semi-finals later tonight. Now, Aruna Darshana competed in the 5th heat in the preliminary rounds in the men's 400 meters race and came in 3rd, clocking a personal best. A remarkable achievement for him as well, and also something to be proud of for all Sri Lankans, as he becomes the first ever Sri Lankan to make it to the semi-finals in the 400 meters at the Olympic Games that's right now taking place in Paris, France. Now, he will be competing later tonight, and hopefully he will make it to the finals and ensuring that Sri Lanka gets some glory at the 2024 Paris Olympic Games. And with that, we wrap up this morning edition of the Breakfast Rundown. But do follow us on our social media platforms and our award-winning website, that's www.newsfirst.lk. You can follow us on X and Instagram, and also visit our Facebook and YouTube pages as well for all the very latest, in case you missed any of the stories that we just discussed today. Until then, have a good day. I'll see you again tomorrow right here, same time on the Breakfast Rundown. Take care.
මම අනුවස් ආත්මාර්ථකාමී එහෙම තමයි